Hello, and a very warm welcome to this, the first session of the year of our weekly ISNTD Connect meetings. My name is Marianne Compred, and I'm speaking from the International Society for Neglected Tropical Diseases. It's a real pleasure to see everyone joining the call here today, and I believe I'm just about in time to wish everyone a very happy new year, 2022. And what a year indeed for neglected tropical diseases, a year that will soon see the 10th anniversary of the London Declaration on NTDs, consolidated with the launch of the Kigali Declaration, also the world's third NTD Day later this month, and many other landmark moments. So what a joy, actually, an honor, in fact, quite simply a lovely treat to start off this really important year for NTDs with a session that will take us along the NTD story through its many successes, from its beginnings in tropical medicine to what is now no less than a worldwide advocacy movement in full swing for global equity. And so who better to chart this incredible journey than someone who has spent no less than a lifetime working in NTDs and particularly schistosomiasis. I'm sure everyone has already recognized today's guest, Professor Alan Fenwick. Thank you so much for making time for us today. And Alan, it's quite difficult actually to introduce you in a few seconds, and I'm not certain that it's entirely needed, but perhaps I'll just start by reminding everyone that through your tireless work in Schisto, you're Professor Emeritus at Imperial College London, where you worked and taught for many years. You're the founder of the Schistosomiasis Control Initiative, who for a long time was based at Imperial College. You're also a member of the Global Schistosomiasis Alliance, the recipient of numerous awards and honors. The list goes on. And now, very fortunately, at a time when the NTD community has been both quite introspective, reflecting on the journey and the achievements of its past, but also very outward looking, turning to the future and the next set of ambitious goals, you're now also the author, not just of countless scientific papers, but of a newly published book for us all to enjoy, taking us behind the scenes with the many individuals, but also the very organizations that have enabled these successes, and one of which is namely the Schistosomiasis Control Initiative. And so for all these reasons, it's our pleasure to welcome you today. We're going to be talking about your recent book. I'd like to put this up on screen. There we go. I hope everyone can see this. Your book, A Tale of a Man, a Worm and a Snail, the Schistosomiasis Control Initiative, is really what's brought us here all together today. For all the reasons I've just mentioned, it's our pleasure to welcome you today, Alan, for this Meet the Author session, to hear all about these stories and the book. And so without any further ado, I'll hand over to you. And we look forward to hearing all about your new book, Alan.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the lovely introduction, Marianne. You're getting very good at doing splendid introductions that people don't really deserve. My book I've had to do something during lockdown and retirement, and so I've produced this tome with the assistance of two other people. It actually starts at the beginning of my life, but I'm going to start this talk today from 1966 and just give you a quick run through of how lucky I've been to have the life, and hopefully to tell you and remind you that in 2000 nobody in sub-Saharan Africa was being treated for schistosomiasis, and today something like 60 million treatments a year are being handed out by ministries of health with the support of the SCI Foundation. So with let's see if I can work this, with the next slide, in 1966, an awful lot of people were doing schistosomiasis research. And I was presented with this picture so that I would know just what a great group of people I was joining. Because let's do next, there we go. I moved to Arusha in Tanzania and joined the Tropical Pesticides Research Institute in 1966. I, at that time, had an honours degree in chemistry and a master's degree in parasitology from the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. And my professor had very kindly seen an advertisement in Nature which said that they were looking for a biologist with an interest in chemistry to control snails using molluscicide. And when I applied for the job, it turned out there was no such thing as a biologist with an interest in chemistry, but there was fortunately me, the chemist with an interest in biology. So I got the job and I flew to Arusha in northern Tanzania. So what did I do there? I was there for 5 years with a 5-year contract, and I had one holiday in the middle of it. I studied molluscicides to kill snails, and at that time, the various molluscicides available were copper sulfate, bailicide, frescon. But I was given a lot of freedom to do what I wanted to do, as long as it involved schistosomiasis. And I linked up with a doctor in a sugar estate, and we studied the cane cutters and worked out whether cane cutters could cut cane faster if they had schistosomiasis or if they didn't have schistosomiasis. I studied baboons in a national park because I was lucky enough to come up and find a situation where a lot of people had been infected with schistosomiasis bathing once in a pool in a national park. And by following them up when they left the country, they were mostly tourists, we were able to deduce exactly the pre-patent period between swimming and getting serious infections. And it was a nice piece of work. I was very lucky, and it turned out that not many people had actually studied baboons with schistosomiasis in Africa. But one person who had was Professor George Nelson. Sadly, he is late, but he was at the London School. George Nelson entered my life because of his interest in animals with schistosomiasis in Africa. And he is one of the first people who really pushed me forward and did great things for me. I was very lucky. I published several research papers while I was there in the Bulletin of the World Health Organization, and I was able to write a PhD, which I was able to submit to the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. I climbed Kilimanjaro, I got married, and my big hobby was acting in the Arusha Little Theatre. The other thing that I fell in love with was watching wild game. And actually, although I lived in Arusha, I worked in Moshi, which is a town at the foot of Mount Kilimanjaro. And driving between the two in 1966, 67, 68, I saw every animal that there was to see without going into a game park. Sadly, a few years later, they built Kilimanjaro International Airport between the two towns. And now, I'm afraid, the only way to see wild animals is in the national parks. So I submitted my PhD, and then I was lucky to be recruited by George Nelson to go to the Sudan. And he managed to arrange for me to become a Wellcome Trust Fellow. And the reason I was sent there was because he had two superb doctors who had graduated with PhDs from the London School, and they were going back to the Sudan. And in his own words, he said, you know, the problem is that they won't find funding, and they will just disappear without making use of the education that they had. So my job was to see that they were successful. It took me 17 years, but at the end of, towards the end of my stay there, one of the two was the Dean of the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Khartoum, and the other one was the Minister of Health. So I reckon that I was reasonably successful. We had a great time in the Sudan, and I was very lucky to be able to do a lot of work. We looked at praziquantel as a new drug, and it was really excellent that we were able to try and find a village in which the prevalence of schisto, and it was all schistomansini, was very heavy. And the idea was that we would divide the population into two groups, and we would do all the egg counts that were necessary, and then we would treat half of the people with a single 40 milligram per kilogram dose of praziquantel, and we would treat the other half 20 milligrams after breakfast and 20 milligrams after lunch, and see if we could see a significant difference in the acceptability of the two different doses, and also the cure rate. I was lucky enough to recruit a young lady in a village called Angedo, which was just perfect for the trial. But then we had to get the cooperation of everybody in the village. It was a little bit of a slow process. But then I had my first stroke of luck there, because at the end of my week in the village, this lady, Owatif, said, would I mind giving her a lift back to Khartoum, because her father was there and he was sick. Naturally, I agreed, and I took her all the way to the house where he was staying, and they invited me in. And, you know, Sudanese hospitality is the be-all and end-all. It's fantastic. And they insisted that I stay for lunch. But being in the Sudan, the ladies went into one room and the gentlemen went into the other. And so I sat with Owatif's father and talked to him. My Arabic wasn't that brilliant, but we managed to have a conversation. And during the conversation, he told me that he had been really very sick for about 6 months, and he was the village bus driver. And so the village had no bus anymore while he was off sick. So I asked him, I said, well, you know, what's the problem? And he said, I don't really know, but I've got some papers here. And so he went on top of his bureau and he brought me down a group of papers. And in the meantime, we ate a typical Sudanese lunch with both of us dipping our fingers in the food. And it was a very tasty lunch indeed, until I read the paper, because at the very end, the diagnosis was in English, and it said he had leprosy. So I was a little bit worried, but it turned out he'd been on dapsone, and it just had worked for him. And I had heard that there was a new drug out for leprosy. So when I went back to my home, I found out what it was, and I managed to get it and give it to him. And honestly, within 3 weeks, he was a new man. And he went back to the village, and they had a bus again. And so they all joined in. And every single person in the village participated in the test, which showed quite distinctly that praziquantel was a wonder drug for curing schisto, and that there was very little difference between a single dose and 2 doses. But it wasn't all work in the Sudan, I have to say. This is Dr. Muhammad Amin, Professor Amin, who was the one who became the Minister of Health. And then, unfortunately, in a coup d'etat, he had to go to Saudi Arabia for a while. And I was left in the Sudan working with the Blue Nile Health Project, which was a WHO-supported project with USAID funding. And they asked for British funding, and the British government, in their wisdom, donated me to the Blue Nile Health Project. It was very successful, but it was not just schisto. But it wasn't schisto and intestinal worms, it was schisto and malaria. And we spent a lot of time doing indoor spraying, trying to spray the canals with molluscicides, plus treating all the people. But I played very hard as well. And as you can see, I was a star of the Khartoum Cricket Club. The Khartoum Cricket Club only had 40 players, and we met every Friday and every Saturday, all dressed up in our whites on the cricket pitch, and we used to play oldies versus youngies, subcontinent versus the British, and various other combinations. But it really was great fun. And actually what made it even better was that the British Airways manager used to fly out every year a cricketing celebrity. And I can name a few of them. We had Freddie Truman was our first one who came out, and we had Derek Underwood and Edrich and Manjit Khan came. And even one year we had the English lady cricketer whose name has just slipped my mind. And at the same time, I got very interested in the idea of writing a pantomime. And for 16 years, I wrote a pantomime every year, which we showed on the first week of January, just before the school children who were on vacation from the UK went back. And they all participated, and we had a lot of fun doing that. So at the end of my 17 years in the Sudan, I moved to Egypt, and I was headhunted in the most weird fashion, because the other thing that I did a lot of in the Sudan was play squash. And I played squash every afternoon, virtually after work, in a concrete squash court in 50 degrees. So that's why I always look so slim in those pictures. And one day someone leant over the top of the squash court and said, "Alan, there's a telephone call for you. I didn't even know that there was a telephone in the Sudan club, because nobody had telephones at home. But anyway, I went along, and the manager said, "It's from America." I couldn't believe it. Anyway, I listened, and it was a man from MSCI, Medical Services Corporation, and he said they've got a contract to work in Egypt, and they're looking for somebody who knows about schistosomiasis, because it's the Schistosomiasis Research Project being funded by USAID, and no Americans are willing to go and spend 10 years in Egypt in those days. So I was coming to the end of my contract in the Sudan, so I said, well, why not? And so I moved to Egypt, and that was in 1988. The project was really interesting. It was $40 million, and that $40 million was to be spent equally divided between Egyptian principal investigators, but every Egyptian principal investigator had to have an American counterpart, which is why I got to know so many very nice American scientists. But it was quite difficult to choose which Sudanese scientists we should support and which we shouldn't. I must say my boss was, he was an undersecretary in the Ministry of Health, and he was a fabulous person, and he had a fabulous way of working. He walked into my office one day with someone who, let's call Mohammed, and he said, now Mohammed here is the world expert on liver diseases, and he's heard about our project, and it's really important that we give Mohammed a big slice of this $40 million. Can you sit down with him and discuss a project and possibly work out how we can support him? And I said, well, yes, certainly I can do that. So I sat down with Mohammed, and about 3 minutes later, my phone rang. So I said, excuse me, Mohammed, and I picked up the phone, and it was my boss from the other room saying, this guy's absolutely useless. Can you work out how we can not give him a penny? So I had to work out how we couldn't give him a penny. I had my instructions, and I had to follow them. The interesting thing about Egypt was just how much it had changed. I first went there in 1968, 69, and I went to visit the pyramids, as everybody would. Do you know I had to drive for 14 kilometers along a sand road without a single house in sight to reach the pyramids in 1968? Today, the pyramids are inside the ring road that goes around Cairo, which is very sad. But they're still an amazing, amazing sight. The other thing about Egypt was they weren't very keen on people having alcohol. And so what I used to do was all these American counterparts who came out, as they arrived at the airport, I walked them straight into the duty-free shop, and they were allowed to buy 4 bottles or crates of beer. And I kept a good supply of US dollars. And as a result, in return for that, they used to come round to the house and have dinner with my wife and I. And we had plenty of wine and spirits to drink. Meanwhile, the World Bank decided that they would give Egypt $40 million to fund a national treatment program using praziquantel. And this program was under Dr. Tal Khobi. And we actually, I was the sort of honorary expatriate there, as my salary was already being paid by USAID. And we really had a very successful program in Egypt. There are an awful lot of doctors in Egypt. That's one thing they are not short of. And so we worked very hard. But I didn't only, you've probably gathered by now, I like to do other things other than work. And acting has always been one of my sidelines. And here's me playing on a British TV company as Howard Carter. And I'm the one who in 1990 something actually discovered Tutankhamun's tomb yet again. And this is what we managed to achieve in Egypt over the years with praziquantel. And from when I was there, the prevalence was up at about 20 or 30%, and we reduced it by 2002 to about 2.5%, 3%, and it's been going down there ever since. We did do some mollusciciding, not very much, but it was nearly all health education, treatment with praziquantel. Every school child was treated once a year, and as you can see, the results were quite spectacular. And I'm quite convinced that it was these results that were lucky enough to send me the next stage, which was to convince the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to fund the Schistosomiasis Control Initiative. So Bill Gates won't be a stranger to any of you, and he changed the NTD world. SCI was the first neglected tropical disease program to get funding from him, but we were very quickly followed by funding for lymphatic filariasis and trachoma. And at that time, there were a series of, let me call them NTD champions. We had Lorenzo and Dirk Engels, who were both at the World Health Organization at the time. David Molyneux, who was basically doing the lymphatic filariasis. Adrian Hopkins, who was doing onchocerciasis. Eric Otterson was also doing lymphatic filariasis. Myself, Peter Hotez, who was hot stuff on intestinal worms, and Jimmy Carter, who was working on guinea worm. So how did we get the money? Well, we had a good argument in the year 2000, I felt. We had these neglected tropical diseases, which were the WHO core group, and those in red were the ones which could be treated with a drug once a year. Sometimes that drug would cure the people, sometimes it would improve their health status, and sometimes it would break transmission. And the other strong point was that it basically cost very little indeed. In those days, we could treat schisto for 50 cents, and that included the delivery and the purchase of the drug, because at that time we didn't have any praziquantel donated. The other neglected tropical diseases were more fortunate. LF, onco, and trachoma all had had drugs donated by the various pharmaceutical companies. Let me think, Pfizer and Merck in America, and GSK. But GSK were only donating for lymphatic filariasis, their albendazole. They weren't donating for intestinal helminths. And the other argument we used was reinforced from the United Nations Millennium Development Goals. And they came out with these 8 goals. And we, the NTD champions, came forward and said, well, look, how can you eradicate extreme poverty and hunger when all the children in sub-Saharan Africa are suffering from hunger because of the worms that they've got? How are you going to achieve primary education when these kids are heavily parasitized and they're too tired to go to school and to concentrate on their lessons? How are you going to reduce child mortality and improve maternal health because you're going to have poor birth outcomes when the mothers are anemic, which is caused by the neglected tropical diseases? I also needed help to set up the SCI. On the left, Joe Cook and Michael Reich, they were the 2 people who helped me get in touch with Bill Gates using Joe's contacts. And Michael Reich was an absolute wizard at writing proposals in, shall we say, an American style so that it would be attractive to the Gates Foundation. And then when we were getting close to being successful, the Gates Foundation said, well, where are you going to house this project? And I said, well, I'd like to do it maybe in Zimbabwe or Egypt, because, of course, I had connections there. And the answer was a very firm negative. So we talked about Harvard, where Michael is a professor, but that didn't seem to quite fit into their mechanism of working. They would be very reluctant to fund big projects in Africa because of the risk, I guess. And Roy Anderson, who is now Sir Roy Anderson, suggested to me when I spoke to him that yes, Imperial College would welcome me, and somehow he managed to persuade them to give me a professorship as well, based on my previous publication record. So I'm very, very grateful to those 3 people, and SCI was started. And then we had to get some wonderful people on our board. Again, sadly, he's passed away, Andy Lucas, and Joe was on the board. And Boris, Sir Lesvek Borisovich, was the principal of the Faculty of Medicine at the time, and Sam Zaramba, who was undersecretary and the head of one of the health sections in Uganda. And they all agreed to be on the board, as did Dirk and Lorenzo. And later, when she became our project officer, we had Julie Jacobson. And I've got Dan Colley in there because, of course, he then later ran the SCORE program, but he was also always very, very present and close to SCI. I needed a deputy, and I needed a deputy who had skills that I didn't have, which were basically patience, writing skills, and linguistics. And Howard, believe it or not, spoke an inordinate number of languages because he used to work for the British Council. And every 3 years or 4 years, he was posted to another country, and he learned the language of that country before he went. And also in that picture is another late Bertrand Sellin, who for many, many years ran health programs and schisto programs in the West African countries, Burkina Faso, Niger. You might notice that these 2 guys are wearing a medal, and this is actually a knighthood medal from Burkina Faso, and I was fortunate enough to get one as well. And it was in appreciation of the fact that we treated within 2 years of starting the program every child in Burkina Faso. Another recipient was Albus Gabrielli. So what have I done with SCI? I'm particularly proud, I think, of all the people that we've employed and who have worked for SCI and are now today doing fantastic things. When starting at the bottom, Narcis Cavatereni, he was one of the great movers and shakers of Schisto in the early 2000s, but he had absolutely no money and no resources. For those of you who don't know, Narcis is now 70 years old and is just about to retire. And as a great treat, his wife has presented him with a new son. So let's all congratulate Narcis if we know him. I'm sure he'll be thrilled to know that it's been publicized, but he's going to retire and look after his son, he tells me. Amadou Garba, when I first met him in Niger, spoke very, very little English. And those of you who know him today in his position at the World Health Organization, he has done a fantastic job and he's beautifully bilingual. Artemis worked with us at SCI as a biostatistician, and she's had a number of good positions since she left SCI. Michael French is a powerhouse in RTI in the States. Yobi is now with Helen Keller. Russell is a professor in Liverpool. Albus is a senior person in the World Health Organization NTD section. And Lindsay and Fiona are with Wendie, who hasn't been with us for quite as long, working and running SCI Foundation. And Jo Webster, I can't speak highly enough about. She's a wonderful lady who came over to join Imperial College from Oxford so that she could work with SCI, which she did until she went to the veterinary college. And apart from being a wonderful scientist, I gather that she's now a great eventer with a wonderful horse that keeps winning medals. So well done, Jo. I don't know whether you're looking and watching, but I wouldn't be surprised. So where were we in the year 2000? I'm not going to give you a lecture on schistosomiasis, but I am going to point out that in the year 2000, not a single sub-Saharan Africa country had a national schistosomiasis program. There were no treatments for soil-transmitted helminths routinely. There was no child health program. And what we helped to do in the first years was to instigate schisto programs, combined them with STH programs, but mainly also provided the data to the ministries of health so that in their 5-year plan, they could actually have the control of neglected tropical diseases. Of course, we couldn't start everywhere in Africa. Bill Gates was incredibly generous, and our first grant was for $34 million. I had asked him for 50 and was had to bite my tongue when he said, "Can you manage with 34?" But we agreed that we would. And we picked, using our advisory group, 6 countries to work in, 3 in West Africa and 3 in East Africa. And before very long, we were treating about 15 million, I think it is, children in particular, but also heavily infected adults in these countries. Just to remind you all, though, that the Neglected Tropical Disease Program has 6 miracle drugs. We use 2 of them at SCI, praziquantel and albendazole, and mebendazole also from Johnson & Johnson. Mectizan, of course, is used for onchocerciasis, but then once the lymphatic filariasis program got moving, it was combined with albendazole. DEC is used for lymphatic filariasis outside Africa, and zithromycin for trachoma. And all these drugs only need to be given once a year. And almost all of them are now donated by the pharmaceutical companies which manufacture them. And the praise for the pharmaceutical companies for their donations, which are very rarely publicized, can't be greater. We wouldn't have NTD programs and the treatment of the numbers that we are treating at the moment. And that number is over 1 billion treatments a year, free of charge, thanks to the donations of the pharmaceutical companies. For Schisto and STH, treating school children is relatively easy, and this slide doesn't need any explanation. On the day of the treatment, once a year, the children line up, they're measured against a dose pole, their dose is decided upon by teachers. We don't really need medical staff, although in some countries we do have medical staff present, and then the kids swallow the pills, and I guess usually they get a day off, which pleases them, and they come back to work the next day. Very, very few side effects, very few. We have had the odd blip when we've somehow managed to avoid the necessity of treating people only after food. And if we're not, we've got to be so careful to explain exactly what we need to do, how everybody needs to have something in their stomach before they take praziquantel, and also that there might be a few side effects with children with heavy infections. But apart from that, it really is the miracle drug that I described it. We always had a launch, and in each of the countries we had a launch. This is the person who was the first lady in Mali when we did our treatment there, and she's treating a child. We had a huge launch in Tanzania, in Zambia, in Uganda, Niger, and they were all very well attended, and the idea of them was to get ministers or very high people to come and give the drugs, so that the TV cameras will be there and the radio coverage will be there, and we can stress that the drugs are free, so that there is no danger of people trying to sell the drugs that we have managed to have donated into the country. So just a quick recap of the three pharmaceutical companies who've been so good to SCI in particular. It wasn't until 2006 that Merck started to commit donation of praziquantel tablets, and their first donation was 20 million tablets. Sounds like an awful lot of tablets, but it's enough to treat 8 million children, and we were targeting something like 200 million, or 100 million children and 200 million people. But slowly but surely, after 2012, they increased their donation annually, and currently it's running at 250 million tablets a year, which is enough to treat 100 million children. GlaxoSmithKline, they'd already donated billions of tablets of albendazole for lymphatic filariasis, but were not donating to treat children in areas where there was no LF. That was changed in October 2010, when they then committed an additional 600 million tablets a year for 5 years originally, but I believe it's still going strong, to deworm school-aged children. And Johnson & Johnson, not to be outdone, also donated originally 50 million tablets, but from 2012 they increased it to 200 million. Going back, 2008 was a very important year for SCI. The Gates funding was winding down. They'd only given me the grant for 5 years. They'd extended it with another 10 million for a year or two. But they had told us that we wouldn't get any more money from the Gates Foundation after 2008. So you can imagine I was a bit disappointed in that, because we were doing so much good for so little per person treated. But we had to find more funding. And we were very fortunate that the NTD champions that I had shown you earlier were all working to persuade USAID and UK DFID to donate money. And the results that each one of us had from 2000 onwards was enough to sell the idea to both organizations who committed money. Around that same time, an organization called Giving What We Can and GiveWell both approached SCI with questionnaires that were incredibly long and very detailed, but they both were convinced that SCI was one of the most cost-effective charities in the world. And the net result is a huge amount of money. I wouldn't like to guess how much we've had from GiveWell, probably over $25 million to spend with our budget in order to make sure that we continue to increase the number of treatments that we could deliver. And that also meant that in addition to the UK money, we could increase from 6 to 16 countries. And then a philanthropist called Luke Ding came to see us, and he also at that time jumped in and said that he would fund our program in Rwanda and Burundi for 3 years. Our cause was helped by recognition. And another reason why 2008 was an important year was that Boris, the head of the Faculty of Medicine, nominated SCI to prepare a proposal or in the competition, which is held every 2 years for the Queen's Anniversary Prize. And obviously I wouldn't be telling you this if we hadn't won it, but we had. And that's me with Sir Richard Sykes. He at the time was the head of Imperial College, and we went and saw the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, and we were given a scroll, and we were given a medal, and we were invited to meet them both on a more relaxed way. And these are some of the SCI. I think Fiona's in here watching. She'll remember that with fondness, I'm sure. And Elisa and Michael French were allowed to meet the Queen. There were 20 prize winners, and each prize winner was allowed a group of 10 people. I think it was 10. And the Queen went one way round, and the Duke of Edinburgh went round the other way, and they all chatted to us. It really was a lovely day. And there is the medal, and there is the citation. I believe the citation is still at Imperial College, because it was Imperial College who were the winners. So let's just have a quick look at the amount of money that the British government have given to NTDs. And it really is a reflection of the advocacy that we all put forward, but also the number of successful treatments that we made. And it's exactly the same with the United States, where RTI was successful in their first bid, which was an award of $100 million over 5 years. And that money has gone up almost exponentially. And the number of people who they've treated, I wouldn't like to guess. In addition to that, The Life You Can Save with Peter Singer, Giving What We Can, which is based in Oxford, and GiveWell, which is based in the United States, have all been very, very generous to us. And Legatum funded our programs in Rwanda and Burundi after Luke, or was it maybe it was the other way around. I think Legatum came first. And they read about us in the Financial Times. The owner of Legatum read an article by Andrew Jack, who was the health correspondent, and he'd interviewed me about Bill Gates and asked me how great he was, and I told him how great he was, but then I said, unfortunately, he's stopping funding us. And I must admit, I find it difficult to believe, because it's so cost effective at 50 cents per person per year. And they thought that was a great idea, and they agreed to fund our program in Rwanda and Burundi, which again was very successful, as a result of which they started the N Fund. And that N Fund, based in the States, has gone to high net worth individuals and raised huge amounts of money. And they have now expanded, and they have 10 implementing partners in 15 countries, and have done a fantastic job with NTDs. If you want to fill a hall, get Bill Gates to come and speak. The people in this photograph is a real who's who of ministers of health, head of the World Health Organization, and the CEOs of pharmaceutical companies. And they all came in and made unprecedented commitments to an elimination target in 2020. I'm sure most of you realize we didn't reach that elimination target, and that target has now been moved to 2030. But some countries have already stopped mass drug administration against lymphatic filariasis and onchocerciasis. Schistosomiasis is still being treated, but in some countries the numbers are going down. There's a nice picture, I think, of George Nelson. I look at this very frequently with Narcis. Narcis came over to England for a meeting, and I mentioned that I'd been talking to George Nelson, and he'd never met him, and he was absolutely amazed that he was still alive. And so we phoned up George, and we jumped on a train, and we went down to the West Country to meet up with him. And the other thing about Narcis, I'm taking up a lot of time, I better run through. The other thing about Narcis is that my wife claims that she was the reason, she was the matchmaker who made these two get married. They've been going out with each other for about 10 years, if not living together, but Narcis had been married previously and lost a wife. And Margaret said, "Come on, Narcis, off your backside, you've got to get married." And he said, "Well, I'll get married providing you'll come to the wedding." So whenever it was, 2009 or 10. Anyway, Margaret and I jumped on a British Airways plane on a Friday night, arrived in Kampala on the Saturday, Entebbe, went to the wedding on the Saturday, spent Saturday night in a nice, comfortable Hilton hotel, and flew back home again on the Sunday, having attended his wedding. But it was very successful. And as I've told you, Peace has now just given birth to a son, so it was even more successful than we could possibly have hoped. A lot of organizations, but then maybe you could say not very many organizations who are all involved with the neglected tropical diseases. And I'll just run through them without spending too much time. The World Health, the World Bank, OTP, ESPN now, ITI, GELF, the Global Schisto Alliance, the Task Force for Global Health in the States, Sight Savers, the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, concentrating particularly on LF, the N Fund I've already mentioned, and ISNTD, which you all know about because they're hosting us. And there they are. I must give them a special mention. I've been with them since they started. They came to me to ask what they should do because they wanted to do something. I wasn't at all sure there was a market at the time, and I think they probably struggled quite well at the beginning. Quite difficult time, but I'm very proud of what they've achieved now. And Cameron and Marianne, congratulations to what you've managed to do. Some great programs. So now from those 6 countries, when I left the SCI at Imperial College, and it's now moved out and is the SCI Foundation, we were in 16 countries, and we were treating something like 40 million kids a year. There are 3 external organizations that have been working on Schisto. The Global Network for Neglected Tropical Disease Control sadly is now closed down. It's past its sell-by date, perhaps. SCORE is also just about closed down with Dan Colley, the Consortium for Operational Research and Elimination, and the Global Schisto Alliance, which is still going strong. So I, coming from Liverpool, invited Peter and Carrie Stever, who was working for the GNNTDC at the time, to go and I took them on a tour of Beetle Land, and we went to Strawberry Field. David Rollinson is currently running the GSA. I don't have a photo, unfortunately, of Johannes, who is the what is he? Chief Operating Officer of the Global Schisto Alliance. And SCORE, of course, the same 2 people put it all together and saw it through from start to finish. And we've had wonderful collaborations with both of them. I'm very proud of this little photo because we were somehow, I don't know how, but SCI as a charity was awarded a charity spot to run in the London Marathon a few years ago. And Mike French, with the medal round his neck, proves that he actually finished the job. And SCI staff came out to support him. The next year, when Virgin were briefing their runners for the next year, we were invited along, and they announced that there is this charity ballot, and every year a certain number of charities are allowed one runner. And last year, the largest amount raised by a charity ballot holder in the 2016 Virgin Money London Marathon was Michael French. And the runner raised £63,650. And the number 2 charity ballot holder raised 32,000. So I'm really very proud of that. And we have we were given a very nice vase. And they asked if we had any questions at the end of everybody. And I put my hand up and I said, it was a very nice vase you gave us, but can we have a runner in next year's marathon? Which they did agree to, and they don't normally do that. So that was a good precedent we've set, I think. So now the ladies who ran SCI, the lady on the left is my wife, and she runs me, and I was running SCI at the time. And Fiona and Lindsay and Wendie, and I must say I'm incredibly proud of what they've managed to do since I retired. I retired properly, and I left it in their hands, and they, because they didn't any longer have a professor at Imperial College, that was one of the reasons, they moved out, and SCI Foundation is now a charity in its own right, and is as successful as SCI ever was. So it's pretty fantastic. And this is the global schisto picture. In the year 2000 to 2010, all of the research projects that looked at prevalence and intensities are on the left, and on the right are all those which have been carried out from 2011 to 2016, which is the last data, sadly, that I have. But as you can see, schisto has definitely declined. I've been very lucky. I've got 2 awards just before I left from St. George's Island Medical School, and the KLM Prize, which I think most of you will know, recognizes the wonderful work that Dominic KLM did in the task force. And it was a great honor and surprise, I might say, to get that. And the question is, where do we go from here? There were still some outstanding questions when I retired. You could say we need new tools and possibly better epidemiological understanding. I thought we had plenty, but we do still need more. A new drug will be useful because there is only praziquantel, but so far, touch wood, there doesn't seem to be any serious resistance. Serological test for hematobium, definitely needed. A better understanding of the trace positive results from the dipsticks with the CCA and the CAA. In some countries, we get some positives and we just don't know, is there really schisto? Is it really a problem? Is there urban transmission? And when will we be able to stop mass drug administration? I've retired. I play golf. I love going to Africa and drinking a glass of wine on the various lakes that there are. This one was in Zimbabwe. I've written my book, and we've got 2 dogs, and we've got a nice house in Cornwall that we go down to 6 weeks a year. And yeah, I'm a happy man. And I've been very lucky in time. And last year I was president of our local Rotary Club. So I'm finishing off by saying thank you to all those who've contributed funding to the SCI over the years. Obviously, the Gates Foundation started us off, USAID, DFID, Legatum, and Luke, and many other donors, many very small donors who give 10, 20, 30, £50 a month by banker's order to keep us going. to my wife and family, all those staff at SCI during 17 years I was based there, to the colleagues who are working on the other NTDs that I've had the pleasure of working with, and to those who continued at SCI after I retired. So it continues to be successful in treating SCI and schistosomiasis. So there we are, Schistosomiasis Control Initiative.org. I've still, because I'm Emeritus, if you want to contact me, I have my Imperial email. And for the book, which I did show you briefly, it's been published by CABI. They've made a fantastic job, and so have my co-authors. And that's what I've decided to say. Thank you very much. Over to you, Marianne.
Oh, Alan, thank you so much. That was really wonderful. Thank you for sharing all of that, and also just taking us through the whole journey. I think a lot of the people tuning into the call, David Rollinson says very nicely, what an amazing journey. Congratulations, Alan, on your many achievements. Professor Julia DeLeo tuning in from California, beautiful seminar, you achieved so much. What a full life. Thank you very much, Professor Fenwick. I think that summarizes it really well, what we've all been thinking and feeling throughout your talk. I just feel really apologetic that we were all completely muted and silent, because I'm sure many of those tuning in were like me, chuckling and laughing all along the way. So thank you so much for sharing that, and being also putting so much personal detail, kind of opening up in that way. And I've been very privileged to have a copy of the book. I've enjoyed it thoroughly. So thank you very much for that. Your audience has been really far and wide, Alan. So I just wanted to take a few moments to give a little shout out, say hi to some of those who have tuned in today. Adebayo Akiju and Semu Adeniyi from Nigeria, hello. Berger Lundgren from South Africa, all the way to Sandra Gava in Brazil, and very late night for Dr. Arlene Bertuso from Manila, and then many, many, of course, friends and colleagues, Fiona Allen, Adrian Hopkins, David Rollinson, Bonnie Webster, Dan Colley, Professor Louis Albert Chwentwente, John Gibb. So lots of familiar names and faces on the call. And a very special mention, actually, to Dr. Albis Gabrielli that you mentioned in your talk. Albis kind of included a beautiful letter in your book that summarizes what SCI meant to them and what their experience has been. So thanks for joining us, Albis. And of course, a really special mention to Dr. Wendie Norris, your co-author on the book. So thank you, Wendie, and congratulations on the book as well. Lovely to see everyone on the call. We've just heard over the last hour, thank you, that you're someone with obviously a tremendous amount of stories to tell, and you tell them very well. So we're lucky that we're brought together by your book, and clearly storytelling and Alan Fenwick were meant to go hand in hand. So perhaps just before, if we have a few minutes, I just wanted to ask you really, for you, what, if you could tell us just a bit more about why it was important to you to collate all these stories into a book, specifically how it came about, and what are your main aims in choosing this format over others? I think you've mentioned in your book that this idea started off almost 15 years ago, but as a bit more of a textbook format. So what brought you to choose this much more personal approach?
Well, actually, I blame Wendie Harrison, because I had started the writing with Becky a textbook, and I sort of got a bit bored with it and put it to one side. And then CABI, who had originally agreed to print it, said, look, are you going to do this or are you not? And at the time, I was doing an awful lot of flying to Africa and America. I was probably traveling at least twice a month. And every time I got on the plane, I wrote half a chapter. And then Wendie said, when we used to go out for drinks, I would sort of tell these stories and whatnot. And Wendie said to me, you have to put that story in your book. Well, I'll risk it now. I didn't say it deliberately at the beginning, but it was back in the days when we were in Tanzania. And my first wife was a Scottish dance teacher. So we had a little group of people who did Scottish dancing every week. And the idea was that we would end up at the Caledonian Ball on November the 30th with a very select group of people who could all do Scottish dancing. And one week, a very senior Shell executive, who was a Tanzanian, turned up and said, could he join the Scottish dancing? Because he used to live in Scotland and he and his wife liked doing it. So we said, sure. And then when we got to near the November 30th, he said, I hope you don't mind, but I would like to come to the Caledonian Ball and bring a table, tables of 8. And of course, the numbers were very limited. And the Scottish chieftain at the time had to tell him, I'm terribly sorry, but only Scottish are allowed to take a table. And this guy hesitated and after 2 minutes said, but I've got Scottish blood in me. And we looked at this exceedingly dark Tanzanian gentleman and wondered. And so the chieftain said, oh, how is that? He said, well, my grandfather once ate a Scottish missionary. And so we gave him a table at the Scottish Ball because he had such a wonderful sense of humor. And anyway, Wendie, Harrison, that story's for you and it's in the book. And so then I just start, and you know, since I wrote the book, I've met quite a lot of people and they've all said to me, oh, I'm really looking forward to reading your book. And I thought, oh my God, you're not in it. Because I was very limited in the amount of room. So I'm going to start a second book and I've got a list of everybody who's worked for SCI and I'm going to write a little story about each one of them. So watch for the next episode. That's if we have another lockdown.
That's one thing to look forward to if we do, then the sequel. That's wonderful. And do you feel, Alan, that in general, you mentioned the lockdowns and this and there's this voracious appetite now from a more general public, really, for all this scientific knowledge, and it seems to have just become much more democratized. Do you feel that there's really a renewed role for the book to kind of advocate for global health and public health issues in a different way that other mediums can? I'm sure a lot of us have on this call have written a lot of scientific publications. Some maybe have even done animations or poetry, but the book specifically, is the time now?
I just don't know. I mean, it could fall between two stools because it's an autobiography, which appeals to some people, but there's a chunk of how we managed to treat in those 6 countries through many hardships, which other people might find boring. I just don't know whether I've got it right. But I must just say one thing. Louis Albert Twemtwente has just written something, and I'd like to tell him that he is mentioned in the book, and I apologize to him for not selecting Cameroon as one of the first 6 countries. It's bugged me ever since.
Oh, noted. Well, Alan, you had a question here from Carlos Teixeira, who is asking, what is your personal vision on the role of scientists' interaction with politicians and local communities?
Well, the first answer that springs to mind is I feel very sorry for Chris Whitty. I think that the politicians, and it seems to me that the politicians have an agenda, and the scientists believe that they could and should lead that agenda with the knowledge that they have. But I think in the past it's worked, but this COVID has been so strange. I mean, everybody reacts differently to it. Some people die within a few days. My daughter was positive a couple of weeks before Christmas. And after 10 days, I phoned her and I said, Janet, how was it? She said, if it had been 2 years ago, I'd have taken a paracetamol and gone to work. You know, I don't think we've quite got it right yet. But I don't know whether it's the science. I don't know what the scientists are saying to the politicians. We know that there's a committee but is the committee giving one set of directions, or are different scientists on the committee disagreeing? Because that is a possibility, and I just don't know.
I couldn't agree more, Alan, absolutely. Alan, I actually don't know this about you. Do you speak French?
If my French colleagues were with me, I have been interviewed on Mali television in French, but I did need 3 glasses of red wine first.
Okay. Well, that's very French.
I'm not sure. I think
I'm only asking because you've got a lovely comment here from Fadilatu Fulbakari, who says, merci de partager votre vécu et vos expériences avec nous, au-delà de l'inspiration que nous procure votre parcours. Votre histoire nous émeut. Nous espérons pouvoir bénéficier de cette bibliothèque que vous êtes. Thank you.
Oh, well, I understood the last 2 words.
Yeah, okay.
No, seriously. That was very nice. Please thank. Now, is it a male or a female?
Female, I think.
Would you thank her?
I will do.
Oui. Merci.
Merci, Fadilatu. And you've got a wonderful gift and surprise here from Dan Colley. So I will put this up onto the room. Dan's written a doggerel rap on Alan Fenwick's career.
Wow.
I will try and read it. Alan has always had that look, and now he's gone and written a book. We've all known him from the start. He's the one who put the horse before the cart. He started out by chasing snails and checking baboon poop when all else fails, but he could administer with the best and ran a great program at Egypt's behest. But most now know him for his work since then, for making MDA work like a number 10. His SCI was the first to show how to make it work as a countrywide go. Up until then, it was mostly theory. How to get it done was very bleary, but Alan put together the SCI. It was clear that he was the organizational guy. So from that springboard, we all learned that getting control was what we yearned. He built that program, and on it goes, helping us learn and work like pros. Schistosomiasis is hard to beat, but Alan led the way to its defeat. And now he's retired. He's finally at home, spending time with Margie. Maybe it got truncated at the end. But that's beautiful. That's wonderful, Dan. And I'll send you a copy, Alan.
There we are. Dan's just put up. So now he's retired and he's at home, spending time with Margie, no longer on the roam.
Perfect.
Thanks, Don. Good to finish it off.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Let's hope we can meet again sometime, somewhere.
Yeah, I hope I read that okay, because it's all in one block.
Yeah, you did very well. I'd seen a block and I hadn't noticed that it was a rap.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I read all these comments? Do they disappear when we switch off?
No, I can send a copy to you. And of course, anyone who I think would like to keep in touch with you, Alan, you've posted your email address earlier on in the presentation. I'll post that in the chat again very shortly. We've kind of run over a little bit the time allocated for today's meeting. It's been a real pleasure. I still remember the day that we met that you mentioned. And by the way, thank you for that very kind slide in your talk. We're all very grateful for what you've done. And I think the main thing we're grateful for is that given the choice, seeing as you were there when Paul McCartney and John Lennon met, I think we're all very grateful that you chose neglected tropical diseases over being part of the Beatles. That's made a really huge difference to the world. So a very, very big thank you. It's been a pleasure reading your book. It's been a pleasure having the chance to kind of just spend some time with you in that way whilst going through the chapters and the pages. Lots of people on the chat just reiterating how inspiring you are, and thank you for sharing, Alan. And if you have any final words for all those who tuned in today, over to you.
Final words really are thank you very much to everybody who did tune in. I recognize so many of the names, and actually, although I have a great retirement, I do miss the interaction with the other NTD supporters and scientists. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. And thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who tuned in today. All the best. Thanks again, Alan, for your time. Everyone who tuned in, take care, and see you very soon.
Goodbye, and thanks for overcoming the technical difficulties at the beginning.
You can't tell, can you? I hope none of the attendees can work out our little system here. We did it. See you soon, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you for joining.